Good evening, everyone. I'm Apostle T.B. Walker. Certainly want to welcome you to Thursday Night Live Bible Study. I am certainly glad to have you here. And we're getting right back into Exodus once again, chapter number 2. You know, when you look at this story, I want you to be able to see that this could really be called like a profile in courage, right? Profiles in great, great courage. And the interesting thing about this is that God used people who were really essentially nobody. Now, before you jump on the bandwagon and say, hey, everybody's somebody, I think, in our attempt to try to, pump people up, we may miss what God is actually saying here. The Lord says, I use the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. And if he points at a person, we would struggle with that, not realizing that God is talking about, listen, from the perspective of humanity, this is absolutely foolish. This is nothing. But I'll use that, what appears to be nothing, to raise it to such a great deal that it would confuse humanity. It's really the weapon that they're not looking for. And God used these people who were weapons that the Egyptians were not looking for. There were certainly things that they were prepared for. The foolish things of this world, even with the foolishness of the preaching of the gospel. We look at that and say, wait a minute. There's nothing foolish about preaching. Well, I'm going to tell you, there is something foolish about preaching. It's human. It's a human art form. It's a human way of communication, right? To communicate something eternal, God is saying, I'm going to use something that is simply fallible, that comes directly from you, from humans. The preaching is not coming from heaven. Preaching is coming from people. And God now says, if I attach the true gospel to the foolishness of human preaching, this will absolutely confound the wise. This will turn the world upside down. This will have philosophers scratching their head. This will have scientists looking and saying, I can't answer for that. That's the thing. So don't miss what God is saying here. Don't miss the idea that he's using not princes, not priests, not potentates, not people with any name or reputation. He uses here to preserve the people alive, to get down to Jesus. The very people, he uses these people who nobody really knows about, these midwives. If it were not for Shiphrah and Puah, these women who we would not have known their names of, whose names are still not that big today, we would not be talking about. There'll be no Easter celebration. There'll be no Resurrection Sunday. There'll be no coming to the altar. None of that would happen. If it were not for this family here, Amram and Jochebed, that we would not have Moses, which means we would never have Christ. So this is major. Let me read this to you. It says in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. Here's what it says. And a man of the house of Levi went and took a wife, a daughter of Levi. They were both descendants of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. So this is, Exodus chapter 6, verse 20 gives us the name, Amram and Jochebed. It tells us the name of Moses' parents. But very little is really known about these people who are extremely courageous, right? His parents were both from the lineage of Levi, and we've got that lineage, Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We realize that they're connected. They go back to Abraham, which is the father of faith. That was a promise that was made. And going back to this lineage really shows us that God had made a promise that there was going to be Abraham, that he was going to bless the world through a nation that was going to come from Abraham's loins. And so bringing us back, taking us back from Levi all the way back to Abraham shows us clearly that God his promise is being watched over up to this point right now. Throughout all the generations, God has kept his promise. And now that we see Abraham, and he kept his promise with Isaac, and kept his promise with Jacob, and now the Levi, the sons of Jacob. And eventually now we get these people who don't seem that powerful or not really big players in any scheme of the word. And yet we see now they've given birth to Moses. And Moses has opened his eyes to a very, very unfriendly world. He's born in a very powerful nation, but his people are foreigners there. His people are enslaved there. And they're under decree as well that all babies, like himself, are submit to be put to death. It's a royal decree, right? Nevertheless, there's something special here with this Moses. There's a favor here, right, that Moses has as he's born. And the favor here is not that it's in me, it's in my bloodline. No, it's in his parents. The favor that Moses is living in right now is that he has believing parents. His parents had been spoken to and touched by God, right? We don't see where it's happened, but we can begin to see here the manifestations of their faith, right? Faith without works is dead. Moses is not the firstborn in the family. He's got a brother named Aaron. He's got a sister named Miriam. But the Bible says she saw that the child was a beautiful child. Now, the general term here is not that, she looked at Moses and he was just so beautiful, there was nothing she could do. No, she saw Moses was a healthy child. He was a happy child. And this doesn't mean that there was any special physical appearance that was given as, didn't have any rosier cheeks than anybody else. But what you see here is that when she saw him, she recognized his health. She recognized she was now having to put herself against the decree versus throwing a healthy child into the water, throwing this healthy child and putting this healthy child to death, or allowing someone else who was a part of the Egyptian population to do the exact same thing, to come in here and to take this child and put this child to death, even though there's a royal decree. And when you begin to see this, you begin to watch how God's purpose begins to come into play, how nothing can stop the plan of God. And I'm not talking about just, somehow God's plan will work together. No, the Hebrews were going to be delivered the exact same way that God had purpose. God had purpose that they will be delivered through the hands of Moses, right? Moses is now born healthy, helpless, but healthy, but in the arms of people who understand purpose, in the arms of people who don't have a whole lot of knowledge of God, but they have enough to stand on. These are not just ordinary circumstances, right? What might be a totally joyful situation in other places, this is a bittersweet moment because of the decree. The king has said every healthy baby has to be thrown in and must die. All the newborns must be thrown into the Nile. So this birth of Moses is not just a normal birth. It births a challenge for them as well. They're now challenged, right? It's not that the birth was hard, because that they're challenged, but they're challenged in a moral way that other houses are not challenged with. This is dramatically different in their house than in other houses. That's really something that we need to contemplate. We look at what we go through and sometimes the things that are happening with us, and it doesn't seem like other people are going through it. Let me tell you something. You're right in some cases. Other people are not going through it. This challenge is not given to everybody. Everybody's not given this challenge, but before they were formed in their mother's womb, God had already purposed them to be the ones to hold this child. God had already purposed them to be the ones to save this child. God had already purposed them to be able to stand. Listen, when we get to challenges, we shake in our boots and we just break out into prayer as if God did not order our steps. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. And what's interesting, he says that he delights in his way. Right? He delights in that man's way. In my challenges, in my struggle, I've already seen your victory. I've already placed in you the standing ability. So if you had talked about it a year before, this would have been something, oh my goodness, what would I do? Well, God says, I'm rejoicing. I delight in your way because I already know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to stand and you're going to do something major, something mighty. What did they do? Well, I'll tell you what they did. They hid this child for 3 months. Now, I think you got to understand something about destiny here and about how major this is. But before we look at how major this is, the destiny here is really masterful. These people were called by God to carry this child. I would imagine that Jochebed was thinking that she had a baby. That's what she had. She didn't know she was carrying the deliverer of a nation. She didn't know that she was going to carry a child that was destined to grow up in Egypt. Right, under a death sentence by Egypt, right? This child is supposed to die. God had already said, listen, here's my plan. Moses is going to grow up in Egypt, which means he cannot die. No matter what forces are against him, he cannot die. My plan cannot be thwarted. He's going to be carried to full term. He's going to be healthy. I've already spoken it. You're going to deliver him Wait a minute, at a better time, right? No, you're going to deliver him in a storm. You're going to deliver him in one of the worst times in your history. You're going to deliver him in a time that doesn't look like it's the right time. But you are charged to deliver now. You're charged to have the child now. And then you're charged to protect the child so that he will live in the midst of a royal decree against his life. All right, I want you to get this. You are in bondage, you are a slave, but I'm charging you to go against the whole of the government without a voice, with just your action. I want you to deliver. That's what they're charged to do. Even though they know what is heard. Here's what you've heard from Pharaoh. Here's what the message is from the world. Here's what the people are speaking to you. And here's what I have placed in you before the foundation of the world. Listen, one of the reasons why they don't get a lot of credit is because the truth of the matter is the credit really is God. The credit is the Lord. How many other healthy babies do you think that women saw and saw the power of Pharaoh and threw their children into the water, into the Nile? I mean, I guarantee you this, the Nile was filled with babies because there were plenty of people who just didn't have this mandate. The Bible says to whom much is given, much is required. They were required to respond to what was already placed in them. They weren't responding to something supernatural that was happening outside. They weren't responding to a voice that had come to them in the middle of the night. They were responding to something that had been placed in them before the foundation of the world. You know, oftentimes we look and we're looking for, when did the Lord speak to them? There must have been a time when we didn't know. If you read commentaries, you'll see the commentaries are constantly trying to figure out the time when God spoke. And we forget that God speaks before we're born. That God told Jeremiah, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you and ordained you a prophet unto the nations. We don't understand how eternity works, that God speaks in eternity. He doesn't have to wait for the time to happen. And in eternity, this was already spoken. This was not some supernatural physical sign that was given, that they were somehow even aware of. Listen, do you think that Jeremiah knew that he was a prophet into the nations? When the Lord called him, he says, no, Lord, I'm just a child. I can't speak. God says, well, who do you think made man's mouth? So when you look at this, the reality is that there's an innate calling in God's people that happens before you ever come down the altar. There's an innate, irresistible call and answer. That's the thing. There is not like I'm answering now in time. No, God is not waiting for your answer was given in eternity. We just are aware of our challenge now. They were aware of this conundrum that they were in the now. But they had no knowledge that they were purposed and equipped. And that's the key. Purposed and equipped. This is intentional. This is not an accident. The thing that you're going through is intentional. It is not some circumstance that's unique. It is intentional for you. It is purpose before you were born that you would be able to bear the challenge. Now, that you would have to deal with it. No, that you would be able to bear the challenge. I will give you both the will and to do of my good pleasure. You are able to bear this challenge. I didn't put this on your neighbors. I didn't give this to people down the street because I didn't give them the ability to bear this challenge. So you're able to bear this challenge and you're equipped with the ability to deeply love your son above yourself. Listen, sometimes we look at ourselves and we do things that other people can't do, and then we sneer at those people. And you don't realize that God was like, I gave that to you. If it were not for me, you would not be able to stand like you stand right now. We look at other people, and it's like, I prayed my way through. No, listen, I equipped you to be able to handle this thing. If I didn't equip you, you would be just like your neighbors. You would be going through exactly what they were going through. You would be drugged out yourself. You would have torn your hair out too. You would have been going down and needed that medicine just to keep your nerves together. This is me that gave you that. It wasn't because you have nerves of steel, not because you're so tough or so strong. This was something that was equipped before the foundation of the world. You don't love your child more than they love their child. I just equipped you to be able to stand against the tide in a way that they didn't have. I made you special. You are special, but I made you special. So we don't need to boast and brag about who we are. We boast and brag about the fact that, God, I did not think that this was me. They were able to look at their son and value his life over their life and to make this courageous stand. This was God. Now, they had to have faith, no doubt about it. But even that is a gift that God has given. It's not that they had, I know who Jehovah is. I know who Yahweh is. No, we don't know that. They didn't, they couldn't read. There wasn't a Bible that they had that they were going to read about. There were things that were passed along, but there's knowledge that we have about what God can do and what he can't do that they could never have known. That was not revealed yet. The law has not even been given yet. Moses has not come. And so, Deuteronomy and Exodus and, none of Numbers, none of those are known. Leviticus, nothing is known to her other than God can speak to us without us having a Bible. One of the things that we learn here is that God's connection is not through his Bible. We're privileged to be able to take the Bible around the world. We're privileged to be able to give the good news by our mouths. But God is not limited to the Bible. He's not limited to our mouths. He's not limited to our service. If I don't say it, then who's going to say it? God. He's been drawing people before the foundation of the world, before the Bible ever began, before the printing press came about, where it was spoken and the Bible could be pressed and printed in multiple languages. Before any of that came about, God was still God. And he's being God right here. The parents of Moses, they did what they did, not as natural parents, but they moved outside of this natural parenting. This was not about instinct. This was something on the inside of them told them, we have to make a stand. They didn't know what that something was. We later learn who he is. He is the Holy Spirit, but they didn't know. But he was there, speaking to them, tugging on them, knowing that they were part of the plan, guiding Moses in the womb, guiding Moses through the minds of their mother and their father, guiding and making sure that this boy was going to come into existence, with everything in Egypt coming against him, with decrees, their legal status coming against him, with everything stamped and dusted coming against them, with neighbors around them that could hear a baby crying coming against them. They decided, no, we're not going to do this. We don't hide this baby for 3 months. They hid him. The Bible says for 3 months. This was something that was major. And listen, just like the midwives, Yochebed has to make a choice. Now remember, she doesn't know what's going on. She's not aware of the power that she has. She has, neither of them know the power that they possess, but they are in a position in their now. In their present now, they have to make a decision. I've got a decree, and I've got to make a decision about this decree. And I'm looking at this child. And listen, I want you to look at this. God put something special in the child and put something special in the mother. It's an invisible connection here. Right? An invisible connection that has a purpose in it. That there's other connections here. There's love and there's suffering, there's pain that other mothers experience. But this one was purpose. There was a purpose. There was a purpose for the death of those children. The ones that were thrown into the Nile were purposed as well. They were purposed to die. This had to be real. This has to be a infanticide. And in order to have an infanticide, in order for Pharaoh to be evil, in order for them to know the depths of the evil and the wickedness of man, some children had to die. And these deaths, the children who died, were purposed. This was not accidental. They were not stronger or weaker. They were also purposed. You have to throw yours into the Nile. That's also part of the purpose. Listen, I don't want you to look at God's purpose and say, see, deliverance. No, some of them died on purpose to make what Moses was going to do, to make how Moses was going to feel, the things that were going to stay in his mind as he went through his times, even in the wilderness. This is evil. There's wickedness. My people have to leave here. Unless some people die, none of this can happen. So God will fertilize oftentimes the ground around the deliverer to grow with the blood of innocent people. And that's exactly what happens here. And so I want you to really begin to see the hand of God here is working even in the mothers who threw their children into the Nile. Even the mothers who loved their children cried all the way to the Nile. That was also a part of this. Those tears and that anguish is going to be passed down to generation. It's going to get Aaron stirred up. It's going to get Miriam stirred up. They're going to remember the wails of those people. Joshua and Caleb will remember this day. They'll remember this night. So all of those things, this would have been passed down to generation, and there would be this desire to leave here will be strong when Moses grown enough to come back and to lead the people out. Hebrews 11:23 says this: by faith, this is important. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. Listen, Hebrews lays it out for us. It breaks it down for us and tells us, hey, what did God do? He drained fear from them. Whoa, the supernatural. Listen, the fear here is invisible. Fear is supernatural. There's fear comes and brings up and conjures up images that may never occur, that will cause you to act on something right now about something that may never occur. It's a vain imaginations. They can imagine what Pharaoh would do if they saved this child. They can imagine the pain, and what about the death of their other children? How would he kill them? Would there be suffering and torture? To go against the decree of Pharaoh, we've seen some of the things that have happened. No way are we going to come. But you know what God did? He drained fear. What happened? How were they able to stand? God wouldn't let them be afraid. God just took the fear. They were not afraid of the king's command. They looked at the beauty of this child and said, no way. You gave us courage. God birthed their courage in Moses. When they looked at him, their courage now changed. This was not just he's healthier than the children next door. He's prettier than the children next door. God doesn't say that. Hebrews breaks it down for us and says they were not afraid. There were other beautiful children that were down there, but God didn't allow the fear to be taken away. But with these parents right here, God drained fear from them. And so you just have to see how dangerous this moment is. The Egyptians were a mixed multitude. They were mixed in Goshen. In Goshen, it wasn't all Egyptians or all Hebrews. They were mixed in together. That meant that they would know if children were born. They were able to be aware if there were other babies that were born. They could see. So this meant that no Hebrew would have felt safe. No Hebrew would have felt insulated here. This is a major, major trial that is overcome. And I want you to get this. And I think this is really important. This was courage that they thought nobody was watching. This is courage that they exhibited when they didn't know they were going to be written about. They had no idea that anybody was looking at this. They were hiding and hoping that nobody would see them. They hid him for 3 months. They didn't want anybody to know. This was major courage that God was going to use today in a Bible study that is being preached and ministered all over the world about this kind of courage. The Shiphrah and Puah, the midwives, had no idea. They did that. They were operating in courage when nobody was looking at them. This was not a courageous moment in their lives. This was dangerous. This was life-threatening. And every time they put it all on the line for God, he blessed them. They had no idea how big this moment in Goshen would be in terms of human history. Listen, I want you to be careful with your little moments, with your small moments, your nothing moments, those moments you have no idea that will change your whole family. The things you're going to do and stands you're going to make that may put you in harm's way, that you may not get the contract. You may do something right now that may seem stupid to everybody else. Why wouldn't you do it? What kind of stand is that to make? And you have no idea that people may be looking 100 years from now and saying, that moment right there, that changed the whole people. That altered the destiny of a whole group of people. Not one family, but a nation. You have no idea what you're doing when you stand in faith. Faith is a ripple that can ripple through time. And so when you look at the story, I want you to see something really great here. I want you to see purpose that comes. And there's not some whiz, bang, boom, supernatural, here comes the lights, camera, action. Not something, a voice coming from heaven. Something purposed in you before you were ever born. That gives you the ability and the power to stand in the power of God, to simply do what he's called you to do. And nobody may ever cheer you on in your day. I can promise you this. Aaron and Miriam get bigger play than mom and dad. Moses is the superstar here. Joshua and Caleb, we know about them. There's all manner of people that we see, and we don't know the name. We don't get the names of Shiphrah and Puah. They're not that big of a deal. We don't get the names of Amram and Jochebed. They're not that big of a deal. They don't lift up a rod and tell the people to go forward. But I can promise you right now, if it were not for them, there would be no lifting up a rod and telling the people to go forward. As we look at our own histories, sometimes we look at the people who have a big name, and we forget that if it were not for these other people who were nameless, these people who nobody's sharing about, nobody's looking at on the internet, if it weren't for them, you wouldn't even be here. If it weren't for them, these great things that we see today that are being done, the potential you have to do awesome things, if it were not for these nameless people who worked hard so you would be here, whose names are not on posters, whose names are not in any history books, whose names are not going to be, nobody's going to ring those names out, on a bell and say, this is a great one. This is a great one. But there's great grandparents. Because of their sacrifice, we're able to stand and do the mighty things in this world that we're able to do right now. Listen, don't despise the day of small beginnings. You've got great things in store for you, and you got great things inside of you that God's going to manifest in this day. You don't have to look for greatness. Just obey God. He'll take care of the greatness. Listen, I pray once again, that you will just share this video. Share this with somebody. Just share it with your friends. Just hit that share button, because I think that somebody's going to need this. This is going to be a blessing to somebody. Listen, I hope that you enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening. And I thank you again for being with us. Thursday Night Live Bible Study. We're out. God bless you. Have an awesome Thursday.